So then we are back with the modern understandings on the time of the Second Tabernacle services are refined in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find a layer of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah, laid away for many centuries. And because of every time there is a repetition of these understandings, then we must also read Daniel the 11th chapter. It is the absolute roadmap where we can understand then what takes place in the very near future. Next year is very near, and 2140 is going to be extremely important because China is closing a deal with the Congo. And then until then, prior of this time, then the BRICS is coming to Brazil for a new gathering, and lots of situations are taking place. And then Mr. Lavrov from the Soviet Union is dealing with the Brazilian foreign minister, so then they can work the details, because Brazil is absolutely 100% bankrupt. Let's be very straightforward, because it is important at least being truthful, so then we can deal with the problem more promptly. At the moment, we have a foreign debt of 2.40 plus trillions of USDs, and we must deal with it, besides then the domestic debts and then the lack of resources. So then, lots of scoundrels lately, they were caught, because Brazil was then obviously aware of the new visit next year, and they were kind of opening up this strong box so then they could verify what kind of a money they had in it, and they found out Brazil has nothing. So they began to do some research and found some scoundrels, and these are on very bad situations. They are in prison, and most of them are trying to make claims and some sort of special type of restrictions for themselves, and the country is absolutely in uproar. So then, because of these, then help is coming next year, so then the BRICS system can be launched. Obviously the next 24 to 26 months, so then the nation is uproar, they can obviously then get to work. At the moment, wars are yet very evident, but as we read then very simply from the Israelic lineage, you can read Daniel. Daniel was a person very involved with the king, and he was obviously a very competent worker. He was a politician, and he obviously also was involved with tabernacling, but most importantly he was involved with then the base of the statue, where iron does not mix with the clay, giving directives, and he fasted and prayed. So then the 10th chapter of Daniel is exclusively for China. Daniel was then obviously many times going out of work and refreshing himself at the river. He would take a nap, and then he would receive understandings. But this time he didn't receive regarding the 10th chapter. He felt in his spirit that he should spend time and truly search for the Spirit, so then he would receive these understandings, and he truly did. So then the 11th chapter, we are precisely then in Daniel the 11th chapter and the 4th verse, and then this truly is the prelude of next year when China makes a deal with Congo. Until then, the Middle East should be at peace, because Daniel, when he was writing it during the time of the restoration period, starting then in 2010 until prior of 2032, where then we find ourselves then prior of understanding the autumn feast. So we have 10 plus 9 years left from this prophecy. It's extremely simple. It is amazing. For centuries, people were so mesmerized by revelation, and those who are revealed, those who do understand tabernacling, can easily, extremely easily, find the answers. The problem is people, when they hear it, they are so, not the word truly deceived, but for themselves to grasp the simplicity of it, as if they were in some sort of a trance. And then they find out how easy it is to make the calculation. The Mashiach was born in 3998, and then if you understand he was placed on a pole, then if you obviously start the counting of the 1,000 years as 1,000, then it would be 4998, or if you start with 0, then 3998. But let's say if you start as per the Hebrew culture, he was born then in 4998, and he was placed on a pole then in 5031, 5032. If you understand then the time he spent with the Samaritans, 2 Yom creation days outside of the parameter of Jerusalem, you understand 1,000 years is like a day, and then 1,000 years is a simple calculation. Then in 5032, when you understand 2,000 years later, 7032, we are then in 7013, the end of the year nearly. So the calculation is extremely simple. And then the returning of the holy cities also in the land of Cush, Yeshayahu chapter 1:8. Very simple. They get together, they do what Moses told them to do and observe, but they don't practice sacrifices. They simply have to understand then the worship and the maintenance of the Holy of Holies via prayer, so then the Messiah can do what he came to this earth to do. From then on, then the Gentile world is preparing itself for the autumn feast. And at the moment, we find the nations then gathering themselves and then closing deals. As we found out today, there were more equipment in space launched by then the Soviets. There were many nations involved, and they launched many kinds of signals over there in space, and some of them related with the security, but we know for sure that there is a combination of the signal yet coming for the new trade system. So then the nations are then lining up themselves for it. And we find ourselves then waiting until next year for the deal of China and Congo. It's extremely important, because then Congo is starting then the Ezekiel's machine, where we read very plainly what the Yeshayahu said, woe to the land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Then we find then the land of Congo. Then from then on, many situations will take place, such as some of them already taking place regarding then the Gentile Netzer, as you find then after the 5th chapter. It's simply the organization of the socialist system in the world. For instance, North Korea, and Mr. Putin is already working in a deal of uniting the North and South Koreas with China. Obviously, Japan has absolutely no choice whatsoever. They must join also with China, and the whole region, the whole peninsula, must be linked up with China. They have absolutely no choice. US, however, must remain alone, because if you read then very precisely Daniel the 11th chapter, you'll find the despised one is United States. So United States must remain alone. Not because of its own working, but because it was in order. We find ourselves in understanding the computer system, and the link later of US becoming richer once again is because of the computerized system, because when the new BRICS computerized trade comes, then it must have a system in the computer, so then each nation can start then gathering their percentages of what they want from the main system. So it's not complicated. Yet we must wait until next year for more developments as we watch the news. There is new agencies coming up, the new understanding of agencies being raided and raiding then countries and raiding then trade and then industry. In these, it is very important because the new trade requires a new system of evaluations. So then, we wait very excitedly, because not only North and South Koreas must be joined, also Cuba and then Congo later. Thus then we go beyond then the Gentile Netzer, simply then uniting the socialist system, but not because of power of military. It is a new form of a serious trade. In the United States, honestly, they had a semi-socialist system after the Great War, because the industry of the United States was very serious, as we understand, because many soldiers were coming out of the war and they were very disciplined, and they invested their time and discipline in the industry. That's why they were so developed and so prosperous. But then after 20 years or so, then those who came out of the military discipline type of lifestyle, then they were given away to other people not involved with the military discipline, and then the United States economy is nearly ruined. So then they must come up with a system with a computer, so then they can take the USD and replace with the Chinese yuan. Brazil already purchased 30 times 12 digits of USD in yuan, Chinese yuan. So the system is also coming to Brazil, and there is lots of more studies that must be done, because this system requires simply a computer, a downloading later of the system, and then doing investments and receiving and sending money via the same system, and then central banks, they can't get into it. Reason why? Because there is no link with the Central Bank of China in each computer. As if you understand, the Bitcoin has an absolutely, in quote, exploded in price. There was 900 per bit. This is truly showing itself very strongly, because people are no longer trusting in their central banks because they have lost. And they don't know how to tackle the new system. It's very simple. Governments are going to shrink. Politicians out of work. Only a few group of each nation will have a very tiny group making decisions regarding services of the country. And that's about it. Because taxes can be absolutely done in such a way where then when people, they are paying their dues via the module of each computer regarding each nation, they can do taxation instantly as people purchase or they transfer or they send money at any time, leaving only the basics of housing and the such, and to do absolutely online. So the future that's awaiting us is simply in the hands of the freighters, as it was then during the time of Ishmael and during the time of the great leaders of this planet. Daniel lived in a time where the freighters were in charge. If you read then, it wasn't truly the king the most important, but doing trade was the most important. That's why Daniel was a trades person, because he had the most authority of his time. He was under the king's orders, but as long as the trade was doing fine, the king was fine, he was quiet. But then Daniel had the most power because he was a trades person. He used to do trade for the kingdom, and he was absolutely very prosperous. So until next year, then we wait until China makes a deal with Congo, and until then we require and must demand the peace in the Middle East. So then what we have left only is the Congo. So what the Messiah has said in the 24th chapter of Tiago then comes true. And this means simply, you will hear of war and rumors of wars. He spoke only singular, there is only a war during the time of the restoration period, and the place is precisely where then Yeshayahu the prophet had mentioned, on the land of Congo. The rest of the world must be doing their dues and work and rebuild, because they were included in the plan. I'm going to explore these Yeshayahu 1:8 later, combined then with the combat of the end, so then we don't get ourselves much ahead, but then we wait expectantly for next year until China closes a deal with Congo. Please stay tuned. Much more coming up.